Are we expecting many more, Catherine?
Yes, Anne indicated that we would have some more attendees.
I'm still waiting for Brent. Yeah, the only confirmed one is Brent.
So I'm looking at I can't see all the names at once, but it looks like I'm the only public member.
Yes.
And the rest are either ministry or staff. So if we're not expecting other ones, we might as well start. And without, do you want to go through the formalities, Catherine, with the agenda and minutes? Or do you want to just go into this and then at the end we can do the minutes? Since you don't want to keep Rob and what is there on online here?
Right, so I think we need one more for quorum. So that's why I was just waiting a few more minutes here. So I'll just wait for Anne to let me know if we should be expecting another member. Okay, so it looks like we had one more member that was confirmed, but isn't here. So we should get started. Perhaps Anne can reach out to them and we can get started with the agenda.
Okay, well, I say welcome everyone. We haven't met since December. Looking at the agenda, the first thing up is the minutes, but without a quorum to vote on that, we'd have to postpone that.
Yeah, we can postpone that.
Okay. So I guess moving to, do we have to do it in the order there, Catherine? The council reports, because the staff has seen all of this, I would imagine.
Right, so council reports we've attached to the agenda. So if there's any questions on those, we can address them. Otherwise, we can move on to the presentation.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
I don't have any questions myself, so go on to number 3 then, and just go over to Rick, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So this is the meeting that we typically present the 2 annual reports that are prepared each year for the landfill site. One is the site development and operations report. So there's two, yeah, you can see them in the background on my screen. I assume everybody can see my screen okay?
We're good.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. So there's the two reports. You can see them in the background image. One is the site development and operations report. The other is the site monitoring report. We, AECOM, prepare the site development and operations report, and our subconsultant Dylan prepares the monitoring report. So we'll be discussing those two reports. With that, we'll also be talking about leachate controls and the reasonable use criteria. So you'll hear about all of those items as we progress through the presentation. So in terms of the site development and operations, like I say, I'll go through that first and then turn things over to Dylan. The specific operating requirements are dictated through the site certificate of approval, which is issued by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. There was an original license or certificate of approval issued for this site back in 1989. There have been many amendments over time. So that is the governing license for this site that the operations have to comply with. The site accepts domestic, commercial, and non-hazardous solid industrial waste and processed organic waste. And the processed organic waste is really the sewage sludge that is generated at the two wastewater treatment plants here locally. Our tipping fee is $77 a ton. Our gate fee is $11 per site visit for everything up to 300 kilograms. If you go over 300 kilograms, you then pay the tonnage fee. And our reporting period is the calendar year. If anyone has a questions as I proceed, by all means, you can just let me know and I can try and answer it at that time. Also, there will be a pause between my presentation and Dylan's. If there are questions, we can address them at that time too. I'm just going to switch over to an image of the landfill site just to get everybody acquainted with it again. So this here is what the landfill looks like from an aerial point of view. Down at the bottom end here is Fifth Line. Here's the main access road into the landfill site. We have our household hazardous waste depot. The blower or flare station for the landfill gas system is immediately south of that household hazardous waste depot. I'll just zoom in a bit here. Just takes a minute to regenerate. We'll go in one more time here. There we go. So we got our household hazardous waste depot, our blower station. These are the two weigh scales for entering and exit the site. We've got the public drop-off area, and the landfill mass itself is over here where you see these orange lines, which are the final contours for the landfill site. And these lines here with the little circles on them is the landfill gas collection system. So it's a network of, at each of these dots is a vertical gas well connected by piping. That piping then takes the landfill gas down to this blower flare station where it is burned. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the site. A couple of things we will talk about in the next slide there is a stump dump where we store, and whoops, let's zoom out there, went in too far somehow. There is a stump dump in the northeast corner here where we manage stumps. There was some enhancements done to that area this year. And similarly, this is our new wood waste drop-off area, which is immediately west of the public drop-off. You may recall there was, some of you may recall, there was a former wood waste drop-off area in the northwest corner of the disposal footprint. Because we want to use that area for disposal of waste now, it's been moved over here to the western portion, which is much easier for the public access. You now leave the public drop-off or come directly to the wood waste drop-off, and you can drop your clean wood waste off here. We also have our tire drop-off area has been moved to this location. It was formerly over on the east side of the public drop-off area, so it's also been moved. So that's just a quick overview of the site. We may switch back to that as we go through the presentation here. Earth borer activities continue to be prevalent north of the disposal footprint. So there's a large area where we can excavate earthen material and use that earthen material for cover. And that's been continuing. As I noted, the tire collection area has been relocated to the west side of the public drop-off together with the Cleanwood waste drop-off area. There was improved access to the stump dump that I spoke of in the north, that should be northeast area of the site. They also purchased a new vacuum attachment for the Bobcat utility machine that's used for various functions at the landfill. So that is there to assist with litter sprawl and litter collection. And the staff out at the landfill established a new standard operating procedure for the receipt and management of the odorous wastewater plant grit. So from the wastewater treatment plants, we get the sewage sludge, but we also, there are bins of grit that come to the landfill site periodically, and they established a new standard operating procedure to try and minimize odors related to the disposal of that grit material. In terms of diversion at the site, we've got leaf and yard waste composting, which occurs at the north of the site. I'll just quickly switch back there so we can see that again. So immediately north of the footprint, so the landfill footprint ends basically here, but immediately north of it is the compost pad where we have open windrows of leaf and yard waste that are being composted actively. I mentioned the earth borrow area. Again, that's north of the compost area. This is where they're excavating material for cover on a regular basis. So we've got, in terms of diversion, leaf and yard waste composting, we collect tires, batteries, propane tanks, metals, and various appliances, clean wood waste, recyclables. These are our standard blue box recyclables, which includes fibers and containers. So you can see in the images here, there's an area at the public drop-off for the blue box recyclables. In the bottom right corner, we have a picture of our household hazardous waste depot. This here is the electronics bin. So there's waste, a place to collect waste, electrical and electronic equipment. And as I mentioned, the household hazardous waste depot. So in terms of litter control, there are a number of things that are done on a daily basis. The waste as it is disposed of in the working phase is compacted daily with our waste compactor. Cover is applied daily to try and mitigate wind-blown litter. We also have portable and permanent fencing installed at the site. So on the right image here, you can see one of the permanent fences along one of the access road. This is along the eastern portion of the landfill. And then we have these larger portable fences that are installed right near the working face, and they can be moved, obviously, depending on which way the prevailing winds are blowing on a given day. So they're used immediately at the working face. And then we have litter pickup programs, both manual and industrial vacuum. This is one of the industrial vacuums, but they did purchase another industrial vacuum this year to use with the Bobcat. So in terms of nuisance management and in particular odor control, as we talked about, I mentioned that active landfill gas collection system. So there is a blower station here, which basically generates a vacuum on the landfill mass. So we talked about those vertical landfill gas wells and the piping, subsurface piping. So there's a vacuum that is generated within the landfill mass to draw the landfill gas down to this station. And here you see a flare. This is where we burn off the landfill gas, which, this particular system is now active across the better portion of half of the disposal footprint and has been very beneficial in terms of reducing odor generated at the site. We also, one of the big challenges we've had is with respect to the biosolids or the sewage sludge. So to manage, the odors associated with the sewage sludge and its disposal, before the sewage sludge leaves the two treatment plants, there's an odor reducing or odor neutralizing agent that is applied to those trailers, the biosolids in those trailers before it leaves the plants and is transported to the landfill site. Once it is disposed of in the working phase, cover is applied promptly. And also when those trailers, the empty trailers leave the site, there's another application of odor neutralizer applied to those empty trailers. In transit to the site, we have impermeable tarps on the trailers to try and contain the odors in transit to the site. And those trailers receive regular monthly wash downs. So in total, there was 36 washes completed in 2021. So generally, we try to wash them once a month to get rid of the residual biosolids that may have built up on the outside of the trailer. And then at the site itself, you can see in the image here, we have this portable odor neutralizing mist sprayer. So depending again on the direction of the winds on a given day, this will be set up in a location during the disposal of the biosolids to try and neutralize the odors associated with the biosolids in the actual working face at the landfill. And as I mentioned earlier, there's that new standard operating procedure for the receipt and management of the wastewater grit as well. So in terms of odor complaints, we would like to sort of jump up and down and clap our hands about the fact that we had no odor complaints in 2021. We realize, however, this is an anomalous year in the sense that we certainly don't expect that that's going to be the norm. So obviously the city is continuing with their rigorous activities and trying to manage odors as best as possible. So the same rigorous program that we just talked about obviously will continue. And, we are happy to see that, obviously we saw very little odor complaints, none in 2021. However, in general, we've been seeing roughly the average is somewhere in the range of about 10 odor complaints a year. So this was a little bit of an anomalous year. And typically, based on the historical odor complaints we have received, we believe they are largely related to the delivery and disposal of the biosolids. And I think most on the call are aware that we are currently in the design phase of a biosolids processing facility, which will be used to receive the biosolids. It will be a building type structure where the biosolids will be received. So rather than dumping them in the working face of the landfill, they'll go into this building where they will be received, mixed with amendment, and composted in a controlled environment with odor control. So once that facility comes online, which is estimated to be 2025, we are expecting that it will have a significant beneficial impact on odor as well. In terms of active disposal areas in 2021, we've been active in the northwest quadrant of the disposal footprint. So in general, 2021, we were active in this area where you see the double hatch. And in 2022, we're going to continue to use that area, and it's going to extend a little further west to include the area where the former wood waste disposal site was. So very similar areas in 2021 and 2022 in the northwest quadrant. And then if we have a look at this particular figure, what we're trying to show here is where we have capacity remaining within the disposal footprint. You can see in the legend over here, as you get to a lighter color and specifically yellow, that means we've reached final contours. We can't put any more waste in the site where it's yellow in color. As you get into the darker colors, the purple and the dark blues, those are the areas where we have the most disposal capacity remaining. And you can see where it is purple, we have more than 15 meters of depth left to place waste. So there's one little location here where we've got as many as 15 meters in depth of waste where we can place. You can see where we've been active in the more recent past in this northwestern portion. The color is becoming a little lighter as we use up disposal capacity. I will, however, note that this image is from April 2020. So that was the last time we did a full aerial survey of the disposal footprint. So this only reflects what the capacity was at April 2020. We just completed another aerial survey of the site this past spring, And next year's report will show a different, you'll see some different colors, particularly in the Northwest area where, again, we've used up more of the disposal capacity. And then this image works hand in hand with the last image. As we showed you in the previous image, you can see it's this eastern portion of the landfill site where we have no more disposal capacity. And if we go to the next image, what we are showing here is the area where we have applied final cover. So where we're expecting to not dispose of any additional waste, we've applied final cover, and that obviously mimics very closely that yellow area in the previous slide. Where the final cover has been applied now, there will be less precipitation infiltration because we now have a vegetated final cover over the waste mass. So you'll have more runoff generated in this portion of the site and less infiltration, which means we're generating less leachate on this eastern portion of the site as well in the future. So our residential diversion rate over the past 6 years or so, we've generally been in the range of about 30%. There's been some, minor adjustments here and there in the sense that it's moved around from that 30%. We believe in 2020 there was likely some impacts associated with COVID that brought that diversion rate down moderately. And you may recall, for those who have been on the committee for a while, there are years prior to 2016 here where we believe, some of these results where we showed higher numbers than 30%, that there may have been some problems with some of the data. So we think really a reliable estimate of historical diversion has likely been in the range of 30%. Going back all the way to about 2005. So we believe that there's probably, reliably, we could say we've had about 30% residential waste diversion since about 2005. Some of this data between 2005 and 2015 may not be particularly correct. And in terms of waste disposal quantities, this obviously shows a telling tale. If you go back all the way to the time when the site was first purchased by the city, we were disposing of close to 100,000 tons per year. In the recent 6 years, again, we've been generally around that 40,000 ton per year level. And you can see that, since 2005 to 2011 or 12, we were in the 60,000 ton range. So, we were around the 60,000 ton range, then we went down dramatically to 40, and we've been in that 40 range. What I will highlight here is this reduction that occurred sort of from 2010 or 11 down to 2016 is largely the result of a significant proportion of the ICI waste, the commercial waste, being exported to northern Michigan landfill. So it's not necessarily that we've reduced the amount of waste that we're generating. A lot of it has gone to a northern Michigan landfill in terms of the commercial waste. And we've been sitting now at this 40,000 ton threshold for about 6 years. So if we just compare and contrast waste received in 2020 versus 2021, so up in the left is the 2020 waste received. Down in the bottom right is the 2021 waste received. You'll see there's a huge difference in the number. So in 2020, we received, this is waste received at the site, not necessarily disposed of. So we received 62,000 tons in 2020. We received 112,000 in 2021. So a significant increase. And that's largely related to this red area. 64% of the waste received in 2021 was waste that was stockpiled or used as cover. So we saw a huge influx of earthen material and granular materials come to the landfill site from local construction projects. So one of the big projects was the third line reconstruction, where there was a lot of surplus material generated, which went to the landfill. There were other construction projects as well, but the lion's share of this increase is related to these materials that came to the site that are not really being landfilled. They're actually being put to use as cover material at the landfill, which means we may be able to do less of those earth borrow activities north of the site. So that's really the big difference in terms of quantities received. Just to go back to the previous slide, you'll see the actual quantity landfilled was reduced from 2020 to 2021. So although we received a much larger quantity of material at the site, we actually landfilled less waste in 2021. And we can look at the breakdown in the next slide here. So this slide reflects the actual quantities that were landfilled in 2020, again in the top left, versus 2021. So in 2020, we landfilled 46,000 tons. In 2021, we landfilled 38,000, so a reduction of about 8,000 tons. And the big reductions related to that is the public drop-off. There was a fairly significant reduction in public drop-off waste. I think it was about 2,000 tons less from the public drop-off. Again, during the COVID period, 2020, it seems people were doing a lot of cleaning out of their homes and whatnot, so there was a larger influx of public drop-off waste. The commercial waste in 2021 was also reduced by roughly 1,000 tons, although we're showing that the percentage here is 16% versus 11 in 2020. The actual commercial waste went down. Why it's showing as a bigger piece of the pie is you'll see here, this little red area, which is now showing 0%, which was about 6% last year, reflects multi-residential. So in 2020, the city, as part of the city collection program, they collected waste from multi-residential buildings. They discontinued that service in 2021, and it became a commercial operation. In other words, owners of multi-residential buildings had to contract with the private sector to collect and dispose of their waste. So it went from a city collected entity back in 2020 to now a commercial enterprise, which is shown here. So if we subtract out the portion of this commercial waste that is actually multi-res, the amount of other commercial waste that was received in 2021 is actually less. So that was a big component. And the last item that was, we saw a big decline in 2021 is the non-usable contaminated soil, which you can see this light blue at the bottom here, which is this one right here, which was about 6.5%, and we're down to 0.84%. So there was about 2,500 more tons of contaminated soil that we could not use as cover material. So sometimes the site will receive earthen materials that are contaminated but are not suitable for use as cover because of the characteristics of the soil. We can't use them as cover. So we actually just dispose of them in the working phase. So residual disposal capacity, we compute it and report it annually. There are fluctuations because the total height of mass within the landfill footprint reaches up to 30 meters. So over time, you will see settlement of waste. So as you can imagine, you get that weight of 30 meters of waste on the bottom waste. There is some settlement that occurs. So year to year, you may actually gain some capacity in certain areas of the landfill mass due to those settlements. Sometimes we do have interim cover, and we do have contaminated soils that are placed in the site and stockpiled. So those stockpiles may impact the calculation of residual capacity. And then waste types and disposal rates also impact the residual capacity. So as I noted, we didn't do a site survey in 2021, but it was just done in the spring of 2022. So to identify the residual capacity in 2021, we used the survey from 2020 and we added to it the 38,000 tons of waste that were received in 2021. And we computed that we have about 5.3 years of remaining site life. The year before, at the end of 2020, we reported 6.1 years of residual capacity. And currently we're saying it's roughly at the end of December 2021, roughly 5.3 years. We are in the process of completing our quantity calculations with the most recent aerial survey, and we will be updating that number to be more accurate with those survey results. Waste management EA, again, final submission is going to be made in 2022. We've been working with the city on resolving a couple of issues prior to making that final submission, but I think we all feel strongly that we need to make that final submission one way or the other in the current calendar year. So we're going to do our best to resolve outstanding matters before it's submitted. If there are any outstanding matters, we certainly will be noting it in the submission that goes to the ministry. But our objective is clearly, and it really is in, I'm going to call it a 99% final form right now, waiting for sort of these little outstanding items to be resolved. And, if we're able to resolve them, we'll do that and then make the submission, or alternatively, we will make the submission as it is and make appropriate notes in the submission. So we're just sort of clearing the deck, as we want to call it, and we'll be getting that in prior to the end of the current calendar year. Leachate collectors and purge wells. So there's two methods that we collect leachate. Leachate, when precipitation, whether it's snow that melts and filters through the waste, or rainfall that falls onto the landfill mass and filters through the waste, it can pick up contaminants and can become contaminated. And we call that resulting water, the groundwater that now has some contaminants in it, we call it leachate. And with, at our site, we have an engineered landfill site where we do capture the leachate by two different means. We either capture it by a horizontal collector, and I'll go back to the map in a minute here, but we have a horizontal collector that is present along the south side and the southeastern side of the landfill footprint. And bear in mind that the groundwater flows primarily in two directions. It flows to the south and southeast, and it flows to the south and southwest. So the groundwater at this site flows in two directions, but it is in a southerly direction. So that's where a southerly and a westerly direction. So that's where we have our leachate controls. One is the collector on the south and southeast. And then along the western side of the disposal footprint, we have a series of purge wells. There are 9 purge wells, duty wells that are labeled purge well 2 to 10, which operate 24/7, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, continually throughout the year. And those purge wells require frequent inspection and maintenance because they can foul due to the groundwater quality. There are specific minerals in the water that can foul those wells, which means that we have to regularly clean them to make sure they're operating effectively. And that leachate that is collected through those purge wells and through that horizontal collector are then transported to our discharge to a pump station that is located on that site. That pump station then delivers that contaminated groundwater leachate eventually to our West End sewage treatment plant. And on average, we remove 13.6 liters per second throughout the entire year, which is equivalent to about 430,000 cubic meters of leachate were transported to the sewage treatment plant in the West End for treatment. And we also received an updated permit to take water, and we've increased the capacity that we can withdraw from this site. It was generally in the 15 liter per second range. We're now permitted to remove up to 19 liters per second. And as you can see, for 2021, we removed an average of about 13.6, so well within the permit regulated area. And if I just quickly go back to before I turn it over to Rob, I'll zoom out here. So in terms of the leachate collector, it's hard to see, but it's this red dashed line. The horizontal collector stretches along the south limit of the disposal footprint and then continues up the southeastern portion of the site. And this is basically a rock-filled trench with a pipe in it, much like a French drain. So as the groundwater flows into this subsurface rock-filled trench, it's collected in the pipe and is delivered to this pump station here. And similarly, on the western side of the site, we have those purge wells that stretch along the western side of the site here. They are operating 24/7 vertical wells with pumps in them that pump that leachate over to the pump station as well. And then from here, that pump station delivers that leachate through a force main all the way over to Fifth Line and Old Gooley Bay Road. And then it flows by gravity to the sewage treatment plant. So with that, I'll take a breather here and just ask if there's any questions regarding what I presented, and then we will turn it over to Robin Montazier to talk about the annual monitoring report.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. We have two more members have joined. Paul Christian and Brent Rubble are online as well now. Opening to questions, if anyone has one. I have a couple, but I'll save them for a minute.
Yeah, I actually have just a couple of lay questions, I guess. And thank you for the presentation. Paul Christian here. When you were talking about the complaints, are those complaints regarding odor? Are those complaints, do we track where the actual complaints are coming from? In other words, are these all site-specific complaints?
Yeah, in general, so there is a protocol that is used by the operations staff at the site where there's a detailed record generated of the specific odor complaint. So for every odor complaint that comes in, there is a detailed record that is developed that identifies prevailing climatic conditions at the time, where the winds are blowing, what the climatic conditions are, where the odor complaint is generated from, what activities were ongoing at the site at the time, and what actions were taken by the site staff to try and alleviate the complaint. So it is a fairly detailed procedure. And Mike, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, but it is a fairly detailed procedure, Paul, that is used to certainly track the complaints and make sure every effort is made to address the complaint that is received.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, go ahead. So
I think that covers that, Rick. We follow a procedure if we receive an odor complaint here at the landfill, and it's just like Rick said.
So I would assume then that for the most part, the complaints are coming from an area within hundreds of meters of the site itself, and not necessarily from any other location in the city in terms of the sewage plants, et cetera. This is all related to the site itself.
Yeah, they are typically originating, Paul, within fairly close proximity to the site. Is generally the case. Yes.
Okay, and one other question regarding the gas collection system. Do we have any idea how much gas is actually collected that we burn off?
Yeah, we do. There are detailed records on that as well, Paul, and they are reported in the annual report. So I could provide that to you. I don't have it at hand here, but we keep track of the volume of gas that is treated or burned off through that station. And we also keep track of sort of the makeup of that gas, what proportion of it is methane. So there are detailed records on that as well.
Okay. And I guess the reason why I asked this question, and perhaps I should know the answer to this already, but is there any potential of using that gas on site as an energy source? I think I should know this answer, but I can't remember.
Yeah, so it's there was a feasibility study, an original feasibility study done a number of years back, and actually that study was subsequently updated with an amendment. So there was a period of time. So it was kind of PUC that led that study, because PUC wanted to look at the potential of utilizing that gas and converting it to electricity. So the initial study was done, and there were updates done after the facility was running for a period of time, because we were able to update sort of the expectations on the quantity of gas that was being generated.
Right.
And, what potentially we could generate in terms of electricity through that gas. So through that feasibility study, it was identified that if there were programs to come available through the province that would, support this project, in other words, some grants that may support this project, based on the level of electricity that would be generated, it would likely become a viable business case for it. So, standing on its own legs, the business case wasn't necessarily there, but if there was some subsidy based on a per kilowatt hour or something like that, there would be the ability to move forward with a capital project to potentially convert that gas to electricity. And the other thing that is currently being looked at as part of that biosolids project that I spoke of, there is a small component of that project where we will look at, the ability to potentially use that landfill gas for the biosolids facility. The challenge being that they're sort of, located at opposite quadrants of the site, making it somewhat difficult in terms of getting the gas from one location to the other, and whether it's going to be capitally viable or there's a business case to do that. We will be looking at that as well.
Thank you. That's it for my questions.
Just following up on that, Paul, this is one that's I've been following from the beginning. The estimated there was enough gas to produce half a megawatt of power, but the business case they keep talking about says that over time the quantity of gas would become less and less, and therefore the business case would be lost. So it's primarily economics is the problem. There's a solution for it, but it's not economically viable. Therefore, the PUC wasn't going to follow up on it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I guess the only thing to that point, Peter, just bear in mind, if we are successful with getting approval for a landfill expansion, obviously the gas generating capability over time will continue at a reasonably consistent level for a period of time beyond, obviously, the 5 years that we think we have left there.
Thank you. One question I had with the hazardous waste and the changing provincial environment, is there an update as to how this is going to be running?
I'll answer that, Rick.
Yep.
There really hasn't been a change on how it's been running. We have contracts with Drainall to collect whatever we get at the household waste. We've also continued contracts with Product Care for paints and things like that. So although there was supposed to be a change and a change for the producers to be responsible, we're continuing to be environmentally responsible for our community and collecting. We're really a collector of paints and aerosols and propane tanks and things like that for our community. So things have not changed that much for our household waste.
But in terms of producer responsibility, will there be a change in the future, do you think?
We're still waiting for some changes to occur, similar to the way recycling is going right now. That things have the regulations have only changed within the last year, so I think things are working out, are trying to be worked out right now by the producers. So we're hopeful that things will change, but right now we're running the way we have for the last few decades here.
Thank you. One other question I had, and it may come up later on anyhow. In the report there, they talk about the leachate itself being tested 4 times a year. I'm curious what's in the leachate from that standpoint. What kind of heavy metals and stuff?
Rob, I guess that would be, I don't know if you're going to cover that in the presentation or not, but that would be over to you.
Okay. I didn't notice it in the report, so that yeah, just for my own personal curiosity.
Yeah, the quick answer to that is that we do test the leachate before it goes off to the sewage treatment plant, and the quality of the leachate has remained steady over the years. So it hasn't gone up or gone down. My memory, I haven't looked at the data, in the last couple of days, but my memory says that the levels themselves are not uncommon for leachate, and they're not awfully high in terms of, sometimes we're concerned about certain metals kind of upsetting the sewage treatment plant and that type of thing. And we're nowhere close to those types of values. So that's my response.
Thank
And
you.
I can just add to that. So the each year when we look at the leachate chemistry, we also compare it to the both the provincial water quality objectives and the City of Sault Ste. Marie sewer use bylaw. And in 2021 and for the past few years, there has not been any exceedances of those two of the bylaw or the provincial water quality objectives.
Thank you. Okay, we'll turn this over to, unless there's other questions, we'll turn it over to Rob.
Okay.
And welcome, Rob. First time
That's-
I've seen your face.
Oh, okay. Well, it's nice to meet you too. So Monazer and I are both going to tag team this presentation, or the remainder of the presentation. Monazer and I have been working on the groundwater and surface water monitoring for almost 20 years together. So we're going to share the presentation. I'm going to present some of the kind of a compliance, how we determine what impacts are occurring, and also the groundwater proportion. Monazer is going to present the surface water and the landfill gas portions of the presentation. So my first slide, and this slide I present every year, but it talks about how impacts are determined for a landfill site. And so, Monazer talked about standards related to sewer use bylaws. There's also standards related to groundwater. The provincial water quality objectives that he mentioned are related to surface water. But in particular for landfills, there's a concept called reasonable use, and that more or less says that a landfill can't have more than a negligible or trivial effect on the reasonable use of a property in relation to water quality. And so for the reasonable use of groundwater, I do know that there's a lot of municipal water is now available on the fifth line, and the number of well users are reduced, but there are wells being used on the fifth line, and therefore drinking water is the reasonable use. So we can't impact beyond a trivial effect on groundwater. So if I could have the next slide, I want to kind of illustrate what reasonable use is kind of graphically, but more or less we have, the upper limit is our drinking water standard. And we're allowed to have, for health-related parameters, only to increase health-related parameters by about 25%. So in relationship between the background and the drinking water standard. So, the emphasis from this is that we're not going up to the limit in terms of the standard. We're only allowed a portion of that limit in terms of impact. For aesthetic parameters, and there's a number of those, but the one that if you read the monitoring report, we key on is chloride because of its high concentrations in leachate. We're allowed to go up to 50% of the difference between the background and the drinking water standard for the non-health related parameters. So as I say, if there's any questions on that, I can answer it, but perhaps if we get going to the next slide, Rick, please. So we have a number of what we call monitors or monitoring wells. I use the term interchangeably, so I apologize for that ahead of time, but we have a bunch of monitoring wells on the site. And, the first monitoring well was installed in this site, I believe, in 1979. So there's a large number of monitoring wells that are either current or have been decommissioned. Right now, about half of them are in good condition to actually monitor, about 97. But in terms of what's in our program, we have 40 monitoring wells that we key on and that we sample. And we sample, it varies by location, but in areas where we have, groundwater issues and what have you, we sample 3 times a year. There's a couple of locations where we monitor less in terms of background, and other locations where the groundwater quality is more stable. And we've already mentioned, but we sample the manhole that's of the leachate that goes off site. So it's not really groundwater related, but it's part of the program. So we sample leachate 4 times a year. So, what is groundwater monitoring? And one of them is not just water quality, but we use the groundwater levels in our wells to determine the direction of groundwater flow. So the direction of groundwater flow helps us track where the groundwater is flowing to. Therefore, it helps us interpret where impacts are migrating. As I mentioned before, the groundwater quality is assessed for compliance with reasonable use, which is applied at the compliance boundary, which is more or less the property boundary. And in terms of the groundwater chemistry, we look at a number of things. We look at major and minor ions, trace metals, and volatile organics. Right now, our volatile organics are very low level. And in terms of going for long-term trends and what have you, really do key on the major ions. And as I said before, in particular, chloride, because of its high concentration in leachate. Metals themselves and how they move in groundwater, what would be kind of non-scientifically called heavy metals, or metals that have higher atomic weight, they tend not to move in groundwater. They have low solubility, and they also tend to what we call absorbed or basically stick on to soil particles. And therefore, you'll see our discussion. We have some discussion on things like iron, but things like lead and the other things are more or less very, very low level, well below standards. So as I said before, we key on these leachate indicators. And my final bullet there is talks about the pump station being analyzed 4 times annually. So Rick touched on how the leachate collection systems, but I wanted to talk a little bit about groundwater flow. And as I said, we determine that from the groundwater levels in the wells. But we really have 2 main directions of groundwater flow at this site, and those are the blue arrows. We have flow that wants to go down into the meander area into the southeast there, and it will water from that meander area will eventually get into the Root River. But off to the east, we have a significant component of groundwater flow that wants to flow to the southwest, or in fact, away from the Root River. And so that led to this dual collection method that we have for this site. So we have the green horizontal collector that goes on the south side, and it was extended up along the former alignment of Cannon Creek to the northeast there. And then we have these series of purge wells. And the purge wells, one of the reasons that we use purge well system instead of a horizontal collector is that the water table is quite deep in that area, in the order of 60 feet or so. So, we couldn't dig a trench that deep and put a collector system in. So we have these series of purge wells that through a combination of what we call well interference, or when you get wells that are installed close together, their zones of influence overlap, and you get a fairly complete collection, so that water tends to not flow in between them, that the cones of depression actually add on to each other, and we get a good collection system. So those are the two methods of what's going on there.
Oops.
And in our discussion, we talk about how we assess groundwater. We look at the different areas of the site. And so the east and south boundary is in the former meander area, south of that horizontal collector, as well as potential impacts that could go towards Cannon Creek and potentially beyond. But we have, this is an area that, when I first got involved in the landfill back in the early 90s, as the horizontal collector went in, all of the concern was placed solely in the meander area to the south, because of the impacts there. And since we've been pumping there for 30 years now, the impacts in the meander area are basically non-existent when you compare today's data with that of 30 years ago. And so, this is a good news story. This has been very consistent since we've put in the collector system, that we have good control of groundwater impacts to the south. Cannon Creek to the east, that was effectively protected when we relocated Cannon Creek a little bit to the east to allow us to extend the horizontal collector system in that direction. And, so we have that same type of protection. For the next slide, Rick, we'll talk about the west boundary. And, the west boundary, again, it's very deep groundwater. So our monitoring wells are much deeper than, in the meander area. They're quite shallow, as you can imagine. But, we've had impacts in that area, and that caused us to install progressively more purge wells. And I would say, for at least 10 years, if not for about 15 years, the purge well system has been very effective at limiting impacts. But we have identified a very small, well, not so much small, a very narrow plume. So there's an area that we have impacts that go to the south and west. Maybe the next slide, I think there's a graphic coming. Yeah. So this is an illustration from last year in May of 2022. And you can see, at 65, we have a pretty high value in terms of historical data of over 400 at that 65 monitoring well. So again, we do concentrate on this because it is an identifiable impact, but all those purge wells to the north are doing their job. As one of the ways to mitigate this, and one of the issues we've had is that our impacts seem to go, there's certainly no steady trend up, but we do have a few years of higher results followed by, a leveling off and a decrease, and then a few years of, and we're at, we've had higher impacts here now for the last 3 monitoring years in a row. So we've installed a new purge well, which is in between purge well 1 and purge well 3. And you can kind of see that it's kind of in the heart of that, if you draw a straight line from 65 and follow those contoured plans back, it goes right to that new well. And it was installed in late May. It's been operational since. And if you can recall, a couple of years ago, we've talked about perhaps putting this purge well in, but having it as a standby well or like a duty standby situation. But for a couple of reasons, we're going to be operating it full time. One of them is when you install a purge well at this particular site, not wanting to get too much into the weeds, but when you install a well, you have a well screen. So a well screen is basically it's stainless steel, and it's has a gap in the it's actually what we call a wired wrap screen. So it has stainless steel kind of wrapped around vertical rods, and then there's a gap between them that allows the water to go through. So we have this screen, this well screen, and it's the same kind of screen that you would put in for a domestic well or a municipal well. But the idea is that you want to develop the well so that you have kind of a clean sand and gravel around it. And so we do that when we drill the well. You might see it on TV and what have you. They put compressed air down, which blows the water out, and it tries to set up, it gets what we would call the fines or the silts and what have you outside the well screen to set up this kind of natural filter. So we do that, but also when we pump for a while, the sands and gravels around the screen, it clears out the silt better and what have you. So that's one of the reasons we're running the well right now, is to make sure that it's developing it up to its full capacity. And then, as I say, the other reason is that we've seen these concentrations go back up to historical maxes, and 462 is an historical maximum at that well. So we want to remove as much as we can. In terms of the natural kind of groundwater travel time, if you will, it takes more than a year to go from that purge well system down to 65. So I don't want to leave the impression that this is going to be an immediate fix, but certainly the more higher strength leachate we remove near the landfill, the better impacts we'll have in that narrow plume that I talk about. So that's the end of the groundwater discussion. Monazir has a few slides on surface water and landfill gas, and I'm happy to answer questions now about groundwater, or we could just wait for Monazir. And well, why don't we do that? Because at the end, I'm going to come back with some of the conclusions that are, there are a lot that are also groundwater based. So I'm going to pass it on to Monazir.
Hey, thanks, Rob, and nice to meet some of you and see some of your faces for the first time. So usually I just hear your voices. So nice to meet everyone. So for surface water is collected 5 times a year and at 5 locations. So if you see the little map that's up on the screen there, locations S1B and S1A, actually, sorry, just S1B. That is an upstream well location. Going down to the very right side of the page. So S2, that's another upstream location. And then S3 is located closest to the landfill. So that's where we would expect some issues to occur before any others. S4 just located a little bit like south of that. So S4 is a location where there is not always sufficient water to take samples. Sometimes it's sort of discontinuous or almost like a puddle state, if you will. And sometimes we do see issues there, mainly in hotter weather conditions where there's a lot of evaporation that sort of affects the surface water quality there. And there are many occasions over the past several years in the winter where it's completely frozen and there's no way of even taking a sample there. So we sort of understand why we have some issues sometimes at S4, but not always related to landfill impacts. And then S5 is at the southern boundary, and that is the actual compliance location. And that is the one where, is sort of the important one that we need to look at. So yeah, if you can go to the next slide there. So at the background, or sorry, the upstream wells, S1B and S2, the 2021 data has been consistent with the historical results, so no issues there. Those locations are very helpful in when we have higher concentrations of a parameter downstream at S3 or S4, and sometimes even at S5, but if we have those same concentrations of parameters at the upstream wells, that's an indication that that particular exceedance or that higher than normal concentration is not associated with the landfill itself. So those are always helpful to look at, but they've been fairly consistent with time. Unionized ammonia, that's a sort of an indicator of landfill contaminants or landfill leachate entering in. So no exceedances with the exception of S4, which is, we talked about that kind of freestanding water in the meander area. And it's not unexpected that we'd have higher levels there just with evaporation. Now in 2021, if you look at the report, you'll see high unionized ammonia results in during the August monitoring event. Now, unionized ammonia is directly related to, it's a calculation and it's directly proportional to the pH level. So as the pH number goes up, the unionized ammonia level goes up as well. So all of the locations had high unionized ammonia based on the field recorded pH level, which was greater than 12. But that is, it's that number is actually as a pH is not possible in surface water. It's that sort of pH you'd actually find more in a factory type setting. So that was an error in the instrument itself, and the lab actually it measures the pH levels as well, and the pH levels were in the normal range when measured in the lab, so there was a difference there, and that's how we were able to determine that the unionized ammonia is likely below criteria when you use the lab calculated pH values. In general, the concentrations of surface water have been fairly stable or even improving. And that's with the realignment of Cannon Creek that was done back in 2007. Since then, it's, that realignment has helped out a lot in stabilizing and improving surface water conditions. So if you can go to the next slide there. So landfill gas is another thing that is measured on a regular basis, I believe monthly in some cases. And you can see the methane monitors there. They're in yellow at a few locations. Now, the 3 of those are located near buildings. So the one to the most northern one, which is M3, and then M6 and M7 located further south there. So now monitor M3 first had like high concentrations back in 2008, and those concentrations have been very high. So it's a percentage of the lower. So the lower explosive limit of methane is 50,000 parts per million, and which is also 50,000 parts per million is 5% gas. And for M3, we've been getting concentrations around the 40% gas range. So well above the lower explosive limit. It's actually above the upper explosive limit as well. But if you mix air, oxygen with that, it kind of becomes within the explosive limit. So when we for M3, when we first started seeing those high concentrations, that's when alarms were installed in the buildings, and the methane concentrations inside the building were checked as well. And that's why it's critically important to maintain those alarms and continue monitoring even within the buildings, because If you have a high enough concentration that's seeping somehow inside the building through cracks, and if it gets within the explosive range inside the building and there's an ignition source, that could result in an explosion. So critically important to continue maintaining M3. Now, the other wells, the other methane monitors as a comparison. So if we're getting concentrations at M3 of greater than 50,000 parts per million, actually 45, so almost like 450,000 parts per million at M3, we're getting values in the range of 170 parts per million to even as low as 95 parts per million or 70 parts per million up to 220 parts per million in 2021 for all those other wells. So very, very low, not even anywhere close to the lower explosive limit. So no real issues there at the methane monitors to the south, but M3 significant concentrations. Now that is expected because it is closer to the fill area, so it's not unexpected to have high concentrations at M3. And if you can go to the next slide. So yeah, just again, low readings at M4, M5, even 6 and 7, high concentrations at M3, and detection and mitigation was added to buildings back in 2009. So the big takeaway from this is just to continue making sure that those are those alarms and systems are maintained, so that in the case of any methane leaks inside the building, that staff are safely evacuated and there's no concern there. And if you can go to the next slide there, Rick. So every so often, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks issues a review or completes a review of the annual monitoring program, annual monitoring report. But we haven't seen one since 2016, which was a review of the 2014 monitoring report. So, but prior to that, we would see a review every 2 to 3 years. But it's been quite a while since we've seen one. So it wouldn't be surprising if there was another review coming up soon, but we haven't seen one since then. And if you can go to the next slide, I'll hand it back over to Rob, and he'll kind of go through our recommendations and conclusions.
Okay, so these are some of our recommendations. We put in a new monitoring well called 40-4. It was a replacement well about 5 years ago, and it was kind of in response to the movement of the installation of the collection system, but also the movement of Cannon Creek. And it was installed too close to the leachate collector system. So it was more or less giving us results of what the leachate is like. But what we really wanted to see was what are the impacts between the leachate collection system and the relocated location of Cannon Creek. So we have a new location. We were out there in the spring. Rick's staff was out there, and we have a new location that we can get a drill rig in, which was an issue before. So we have a location that is slightly closer to the creek than the collector, but more or less midway between the collector and the creek. And as I say, it has a roadway to it, and we can get so our plan is to install that well hopefully this year. We've talked before, and Rick did too, about the need to be maintaining the purge wells, and after all these years, the operating procedures, and we have a well contractor that comes in to do the maintenance also. So those are maintained well. And as I talked about And if you read the report, we're recommending a new purge well, but this new purge well was installed, as I say, in late May. The occurrence of high concentrations of methane is not unexpected at landfill, but as Monazur said, we have mitigation in place to protect the structures on the site and the people who use those structures. And what we didn't say is that those concentrations have been there for the last 13, 14 years. So the occurrence of it is not all that significant, but it is always good to remind people that it is an area that we need to be vigilant in terms of making sure that the protections are in place and are working. And that has to do with the last two bullets. And that concludes our presentation, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Rob. Any questions from the gathering? Just a little historical perspective. Rob said you've been involved since the 90s. I've been involved with this since the 70s, when a labor here sued the city and Cherokee Construction for the contamination of Cannon Creek. Also, I'm living directly southeast of the landfill in a rural area, so I'm drawing on groundwater. And in the 80s, the PUC commissioned the Burnside report, which demonstrated that the landfill is sitting on the aquifer recharge area. And within the 25-year time of travel to our east end wells, and they were showing a plume of contaminants leading from the landfill area in the direction of the wells. Then the city became involved and bought out Cherokee Construction and put in the purge well. So there's a long history to this. And my concern is to the southeast, so I keep on bringing up the well number 40 and the replacement of that one, because there's only one real monitor testing the southeasterly flow. Are there any other questions? If not, Rob, and thank you and your crew for the presentation. And we'll probably be meeting with you again in about a year's time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll go back to the business portion of the meeting if there are no questions. And we now have a quorum with Paul and Brent present. So a review of the minutes from December 21st or December 1st, 2021, which is over 6 months ago. They were included in the package that was emailed out. Are there any questions or concerns? It was a fairly brief meeting. If there are no questions, can I have a mover to accept the minutes?
Yeah, I can accept it.
I'll move, Peter.
That's Mike, I think.
Great.
Seconder,
Yeah, I could second Brent.
Brent. Thank you. All in favor? Listen, I'll assume there's no objections because I can't see the screen. So we'll take it as being carried. Flipping back and forth here. The council reports were in the package. Is there a need to go through those reports? They're pretty comprehensive and lengthy. I think the attachment here is 80 pages long. Catherine, did you want to highlight the information there or make any comment on them?
So, excuse me, I've included them for the committee's information. There was quite a few since our last meeting where we provided a package. So we attempted to include everything that we've reported to council. So if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. And if you have yet to go through them, feel free to contact us anytime and we can answer any questions you may have.
I scanned through them, Catherine, and I'm happy with the updates. You're doing a good job of keeping the group informed. The big changes are, as I can see, are the new ministry guidelines coming for the organic waste and the consumer or producer responsibility, which is all being worked out at the provincial level. Any other questions or comment on the operations or monitoring reports? Odor control, Rick, you've pretty well gone through that, I think.
I can speak to that. I have the odor control log for 2022. So as Rick included in his presentation, 2021 had no odor complaints. However, we continue with our mitigative efforts because as the biosalts plant is continuing with design and then on to construction, we still have those deposits to manage. We have received 2 odor complaints so far this year, and I can speak to the last one specifically. I followed up with our PUC operations team, and they were doing some maintenance at the facilities that required some deliveries to the landfill. And typically we ask that that be delivered in the cooler months, but there was some scheduling issues with their contractor, which delayed the deliveries into the warmer months. So we've spoken to the operations team and they're going to make some modifications in relation to those types of deliveries to try to mitigate that for the current season. And other than that, I think the Public Works team and our new standard operating procedures for notifications has been helping a lot with managing our waste. So kudos to Mike and his team. And I think that's all I have on that for now, unless there's any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Catherine. So down to number 5, other on our agenda. The one I have is we've asked the question before, and it sort of came up in Rick's presentation about the ICI quantities. And I know it's private information, but has anybody been able to get some kind of overview of how much ICI is heading across the river?
So as you know, you mentioned it's private information. We don't really have care and control over that. So I don't have any knowledge of those volumes other than, you know, Rick's presented what we used to get at the landfill as opposed to what we have now. So there may be some general assumptions we can make there. Rick, do you have any further comments on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we can share, Peter, is the fact that, you know, back, I guess it was 2012 or thereabouts, when we believed we were getting the lion's share or all of the ICI waste at our site, it was more in the range of about 25,000 tons compared to say 5,000 or 6,000 now. So, you know, it's we do know that. Obviously, we don't know the trends in how the generation of ICI waste has changed. So whether there's more being generated, less being generated between, you know, that earlier time frame and now, but we do know back in those earlier years, it was more in the range of about 25,000 tons compared to what we're seeing now.
I'm putting on my Clean North education hat on this, and when I talk informally with teachers in the schools, I ask them what they have for recycling programs, and I have asked them what they have for waste reduction programs, and most seem to say they don't have one. And that bothers me. I'm not quite sure how to, I guess you go to the school board itself to deal with that one, but then you look at the hospital and you see the amount of, especially during the pandemic, the amount of disposables, gowns, masks, gloves. I mean, the volume has been huge. So I'm guessing that those numbers may be trending up. At some point, either the Michigan government or the Ontario government are going to say, we don't do this anymore. And then we'll have to deal with their waste again. Anyhow, it's an ongoing issue.
And just for the benefit of the committee, Peter, so within the environmental assessment for the expansion of the existing site, that is the argument we've made in terms of future waste disposal quantities. We have made it very clear in terms of projecting future waste quantities that we have incorporated. The historical quantities back sort of the 2012 and earlier era, where we believe the lion's share of it was coming to our landfill. So we have used those quantities in projecting future quantities that may be received at our site. Because as you say, we don't know what how the regulatory environment may change, in the sense that, the crossing of border with waste may disappear in the future.
Well, thank you for thinking into the future. I guess the one other issue on there is the 5.3 projected lifespan, and the EA approval and the tendering and the construction. Are we still going to make it?
Yeah, I guess, there's no question things are getting tight. And I think that's why, we've resigned ourselves to the fact that we need to get the submission in this current year. In general, if you think about a 1-year timeline for EA approval, and then beyond that, there's a need obviously to move forward with the first phase of the development of the expanded site, which would be that first cell in the northeastern corner of the site. There's a need to certainly be moving forward with things at this time, as timelines are getting quite tight.
The organic composting then, that whole facility, is that going ahead in spite of the EA, or do we have to wait for the EA for that?
No, that had its own separate Class EA that was completed separately. So it's moving forward. It's not contingent on the current EA for the landfill expansion.
So timelines on this facility?
Again, it's intended to be operational sometime late 2025.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I thank everyone for attending. And our next meeting we're supposed to have 3 meetings a year, I think. So we usually have one in the fall.
Correct.
And one towards Christmas. Do you want to set a time for that, or?
I'll ask Anne to send out a query to the committee with a couple of dates, and we can schedule the next one.
Okay. Can we have a motion to adjourn then?
I could motion to adjourn. Brent?
Thanks, Brent. I guess you would accept that as an adjournment. Don't have to vote.
Thanks everybody for attending, and thanks to Rick's team for the presentations, and we will see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Rick. Thanks all.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.